Oh, Anthony Quinn. That's quite a while back.
What year do you think? What year do you think?
Oh, God, I don't remember. But he wasn't a star.
Oh.
And he wasn't really known at the time. And he was doing, well, let's get back to My Darling. Tony was doing a show at the Jim Timoney Theater. Jim Timoney was the sort of background mastermind of Mae West at the time.
Yeah.
And he had a theater. So, and they were doing pretty good little shows there. And well, I shouldn't say little, they were doing pretty good shows there, right in the heart of Hollywood. And Tony was doing a show called Madrid Madness. I don't know whether he's mentioned it to you before, but anyhow.
Is this the one where he's topless? No, that's
no, no, that wasn't in San Francisco. That was
a different
here.
One. Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was in Hollywood, and he was doing this show, Madrid Madness. And at the time, he was very busy and busy with his career, and he had just come from doing at the Hollywood Playhouse a whole run of shows there. And anyhow, to get to the point, Anthony Quinn was rehearsing the next show, and he used to come to rehearsal, and they became acquainted then. So many years pass, and later on, and they're doing a picture together. I think Tony was doing, what was it with him? I don't remember. Anyhow, they were on location.
Western, probably?
Something like that, yeah. And they were on location, and we were all on location in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Yeah, probably.
And they were sitting in the dressing room together one day. And Tony Quinn said, remember when you were doing that show called Madrid Madness, and I was rehearsing the next show? He said, I'd see you come to the theater, and I used to envy you so. He said, you were really becoming a success. And he said, but most of all, he said, I just could have died or killed for that overcoat you wore. That he said it had all the buckles on it, and the pulls and the cinch things, and there were things hanging all over, and he loved his trench coat. He said, I would have killed for that. He said, I envied you so. He said, because I didn't have 10 cents I used to hitch a ride to get to the theater.
Yeah.
We didn't have any money to even car fare. And he said, I'd look at you with that coat, and I thought, someday I'm going to have something like that. So, anyhow, that is one little tasty morsel. But, I don't know, there's a lot more. Oh, Caesar was great. He was fun. He lived right around the corner here on San Vicente, down a couple blocks. And he was a
lot of women around his life, was there?
No. I was the only one. But no, he was a great friend and a really good fellow. And we always wound up at parties together, and he'd say to me, and at the table and everything, he'd say, why didn't you call me and let me know you and Tony were coming and we could have gone together? Or we'd see each other, and I'd say, why didn't you call me? We could have come together. And he was always so self-effacing. He looked so like the typical gigolo, or the typical society, that all the gals flock to and everything. But actually, he wasn't that way at all. He was very down to earth. And he'd see a couple of women coming towards him, and he'd say, off aside to me, he'd say, oh my God, here they're coming over to me. I know they're going to want an autograph or something. I'm going to have to be charming. I'll put my charm on. And so he'd smile, and everything. He'd stand up and be so charming and so lovely. But a funnier story that reminds me now about Caesar is we were all on location together in Arizona one time, and I was the only gal. I mean, Ricardo Montalban was there, Caesar was there. There were 5 fellows there besides Tony, and we'd been there on this particular picture for about almost 2 months. So we all went out to dinner together every night. Mm-hmm. I felt like at that time.
You had your own harem.
Like they used to write about Marlene Dietrich, that she always went out with 5 or 6 fellows. I felt like the old-timer Marlene Dietrich. Anyhow, we'd get ready and go out, and we'd be sitting in the restaurant in this long table, and the situation of the wine would come up, and the sommelier would come over and he'd present the wine. But he'd always come to Caesar. And Caesar would always say to me, "What in the hell is he coming to me for? I don't know a damn thing about wine." And he says, "But watch this." I mean, he was so funny, and he'd look at it very haughtily, and he'd say, "Pour the wine," And then he'd have him smell the cork and the whole bit, But he said afterwards, after that whole situation, he says, "What do I know about wine?" He says, "I go down to the Safeway, down to San Vicente, down the boulevard, and I get a jug of Gallo with that and put it on the kitchen table, and my sister and my dad, have some wine when they want it, and I do too." And he says, "But that's about my speed." He says, "That's all I know." But he was a darling person. He really was, very real. He wasn't phony a bit. It was just wonderful. Well, you know the story. I think Tony told you the story of Alan.
Alan Ladd?
Yeah, you remember that.
Well, I heard it a couple of different ways, so I think I know which one you're talking about. Go ahead.
Well, about when they were...
Who lived right back here?
Alan, he lived on Mapleton at the time, right off of Sunset.
But ultimately, didn't they live right behind you or to the side?
No. Mm-mm.
Well,
Peter Lorre, years ago.
Peter Lorre lived over there?
Yes.
Right behind you?
Uh-huh. Over to the side.
No, I guess I did know that. Okay, go ahead.
On that second property over there. Yeah, it's a big property. But so is this. Yeah. Anyhow, what was I going to say?
Alan Ladd.
Alan, I think Tony told you that story.
Yeah, but...
No, but when they were both quite young, Tony had just gotten out of high school, or maybe hadn't graduated. He was around 18. Pardon me. And he went to an audition for the Pasadena Playhouse, and his dad drove him, because he didn't have a car, so his dad drove him, and probably drove him in a truck or something.
Yeah, I was going to say it wasn't a car, I'll bet.
Anyhow, they were there in the audience and waiting their turn and everything, and there was some little thin blonde fellow sitting down a couple of seats, or the next seat or so over from Tony, and they exchanged a couple words like, "You're here for the audition," blah, 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 that sort of thing. So anyhow, they waited, and then the whole thing broke for lunch. And Tony turned to the fellow and said, "Well, you're alone. Do you want to come with us and, get a cup of coffee and a hamburger or something?" And this blonde fellow said, "Well, thanks very much, but no." He said, and Tony said, "Well, why not? It's lunch." He says, he said, another Anthony Quinn story, he had to hitchhike. He said, I don't have the money for the coffee and the hamburger. he didn't even have a dime, he had to hitchhike. So Tony said, "Oh, that's okay. Come along, my dad will buy us each a hamburger and a cup of coffee." A big spender,
Yeah.
So he said no. He said, "Oh, come on, for heaven's sake." So he went with them, and they went. They had the whatever, and they came back, and they each did their auditions or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And now a few years go by, and we lapse into the Paramount studio, and Tony is on a picture with a fellow named Alan Ladd, and who is the star of the picture. And about the second or third day that he was there, the assistant director came over and said, "Oh, Mr. Caruso, Mr. Ladd would like to see you in his dressing room." And Tony thought, "Gee, what'd I do? Or why, or what?" So he said, "Okay, thank you." So he went over and knocked on the door, and he heard the voice say, "Come in." So he went in, and it was Alan Ladd, and Alan said, "Sit down." So Tony sat down, and he sat there for a minute looking at him, and he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And Tony said, "Should I?" Typical. And he said, "Well, do you remember the fellow who was quite timid?" He still was later on, but who was sitting next to you, and you took to lunch for a hamburger and a cup of coffee?" And Tony said, "Oh, yeah, vaguely, yeah, right." And Alan said, "Well, I was that fellow that you took to lunch," he said, "because I didn't have a dime to go buy a cup of coffee even. I had to hitchhike there." And to make a long story short, Tony said, "Well, for heaven's sakes, great to see you, etc." And from that day on, well, Tony did, I think, 14, 15, or 16 pictures with Alan.
Mm-hmm.
But Alan would come out here to the house, and with the script under his arm, and walk in the house and throw the script on the coffee table there and say, "Pick your part, Tony." And Tony would look the script over, and pardon me, sometimes he'd say, "Well, gee, Alan, there's just nothing in this for me. I don't see anything for me at all." And other times he'd say, "Well, hey, I'd like to do that part." And Alan'd say, "It's yours." And Tony never took advantage of the fact that Alan was so generous that way, and if he wanted to do a part, he would have done it regardless. But he never took advantage of the fact that he brought out and offered him anything he wanted to do in the script. And consequently, Alan was just very relaxed about the whole thing. But I think that's why they remained such good friends all the years, because it was a great friendship. He and his wife, Sue, we remained friends right up to the end. Tragic end. But that's the way he used to do it with the scripts. And if there was something in it, Tony would say, "Gee, I'd love to do this part." And Alan would say, "It's yours." And otherwise, he'd say, "There's nothing in this one, Alan." And that would be the way,
Weren't you friends with, was it Marilyn Monroe?
Not friends, but I met her up at the Mitchums.
Oh.
I say up at the Mitchums,
Around the corner.
Mitchums, around the corner, yeah.
Okay.
They were having a party one night, which was a seldom occasion up there. They lived very quietly.
Mm-hmm.
contrary to what you'd read in all the papers. Bob was a homebody. He was always around the house in old clothes, poking around, either reading or writing. He wrote a lot.
Did he?
Yeah, he was a good writer, and he wrote poetry. He wrote songs.
Well, I spent, half an hour with him taking his picture, and I got a million stories out of him.
Oh, yeah.
He started, every story, they were all fascinating, about Raoul Walsh, and, it just kept pouring out of him.
Oh, yeah.
God,
He was a great storyteller, and he was a funny humor.
Yeah.
His humor was so dry,
Well, this is what this, now I should be interviewed, but when I photographed him, I said, by aunt and uncle and, who they were, and I said, I remember going over to your house, and he said, oh, we're, off of Mandeville Lane. And I said, there was something weird. I can't put my finger on it, but there was something sort of scary about your porch. And I can't remember what it was. I was probably, 6, 7 years old. And he looks at me and he kind of turns his head funny and he said, there was a big toucan in a cage on that thing. And you look real familiar. I think you're the little shit that kept sticking his finger in the cage.
That sounds like Bob.
Yeah. He said, I'm sure it's you.
Yeah.
And he goes, Dorothy, come over.
Yeah, he was very fast. He was very quick, and he could see humor in everything. His wit was so sharp. And he was a very funny man. He also was a very serious person many times, and a very tender man. And I saw many examples of it. And I remember the first day that we came home from the hospital with Tonia. And he was here waiting for us. And when the car drove up, he ran out to the car, opened the car door, and took the baby right out of my arms and carried him in the house. But carefully. It was really sweet. But he was very dry and very funny. And he and Tony built our back porch. He came over every day with a hammer, and they were out there having a great time just building on the back porch. You mean like a favorite actor or actress?
Well, that you knew personally, who was here.
Who was here.
That you guys,
John Huston sat here for a number of nights, drinking his brandy and regaling us with many, many stories. He was such a character. Tony had worked for him, and it was a wonderful privilege. He had this marvelous humor and this wonderful delivery.
Yes. And
once he was ensconced right there in that chair, he was there for the rest of his, forever.
Bobby sat in the same chair as John Huston.